Hello again, my name is Brittany and I've been documenting my attempts at creating a Airbender Air Nomad cosplay for this year's San Diego Comic-Con. I'm at the point where I'm making the top for this. I had in mind how I want it to look, so this is kind of the steps that I took to get to the final product. So I'm pretty excited about it. This one turned out way better than I expected. I thought it was going to look like shit, and it doesn't, so that's pretty good. Check it out.
I started off by sketching how I wanted this top to actually look. I knew I wanted a cheap house style with like a mandarin collar, but I wasn't entirely sure how the body was going to turn out. I also knew that I wanted it to be like a tank top and maybe a little bit more of a cropped. So I decided to go with a wrap top because that would kind of give the cheap house style front and then also add a mandarin collar at the end. Next, I traced out my pattern onto some scrap fabric to double check that all of the dimensions I did were good. I also forgot to do seam allowance on the practice fabric, so I'm glad I did use practice fabric in the end. For the front pieces that we're going to be wrapping, I ended up folding the fabric in half and then just tracing one side of the pattern so that I could cut it into two and then have both sides. After both front panels and the back panel were cut out, I pinned them along the top and along the sides in order to quickly try on the top and see if it was going to fit the way I wanted it to. Happy with the result, I then used that original scrap fabric to use as a pattern to trace. When I traced onto my real fabric, I used a light pencil and I also added an inch, I believe, seam allowance along all sides of each piece. After tracing the pattern, I went ahead and cut out all the pieces. At first, I pinned the two shoulder pieces together and then down one side of the front, since the other side is going to have a hole for the tail of the wrap to go through, so I wanted to wait until I'd already pinned all the other sides and sewed them shut to figure out where I wanted that hole to be. Zigzag stitch to sew up all these seams. I really should learn how to do a rolled hem, but I don't know yet, so zigzag stitch works since this fabric frays really easily. After sewing the shoulders and one side, I then measured out roughly where I wanted the hole for the wrap to go to be, so I actually tried it on and then figured out where I wanted to be able to tie through the back, and then pinned up one side and then up the other side, but leaving the gap in the middle. I then sewed up to the gap, skipped over the gap, and then sewed up the other side. After I pinned up all of my hems, not pictured, and then sewed all of the hem edges up about a ½ inch. The armhole seams were a bit more difficult to maneuver, but I did follow the same steps where I pinned them about ½ inch of a seam and then sewed around. After I finished sewing the body of the top, I started working on the collar. I had to do a bit of research for this one because I wanted to make sure that the collar actually stood up on its own, so I'll link the blog that I followed below, so if interested you can do the same. But I pretty much made the collar pattern on some paper and then cut out the pieces. I don't have any interfacing, which is what the pattern calls for, to put inside of the collar in order to keep it more firm, so I just used some of my scrap fabric that I'd used before. After cutting out the pieces, you pin the sides and the top of the collar only and then sew that shut. and flip the collar inside out and then line it with that either interfacing or some scrap fabric in my case. And then the hard part was pinning the collar onto the neckline of the actual top. So I had to do some measuring, figure out where the center line was, and then you have to use a lot of pins to ensure that the curve you want for the collar actually stays where you want it to be. I should also mention that I'm pinning the collar right sides together, so when you iron it out and put it on, the seam is on the inside of the top. Sewing the collar on was also fairly meticulous. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't any gaps or I wasn't lining up the fabric incorrectly. So once you get all that squared away, you just follow your pins and sew straight across. And here is the rough finished top. I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. You can see it with the cape. Once everything is completely done, it'll flow a bit nicer, but overall, pretty good.
Alright, so this is my pretty much final top for my cosplay. I'm pretty excited about it. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect since I've, one, never sewn a top before, and two, definitely never sewn this style top before. But the collar, I think, is what I'm most excited about. It actually stands up and like looks like someone who knows how to sew has sewn it. There are a few blemishes, like right here, my sewing machine got all messed up and I just decided to leave it alone since I'm going to be wearing a cape for part of this anyway. But overall, I'm pretty excited about this one. I'm deciding if I want to add extension to the ties or not, so I can tie like a bigger bow or not as tight, but I'll figure that out later on. Yeah, pretty excited. The next couple of videos I'll be doing will be more accessories. I know for sure I want to make a leather bag, just so it doesn't, carrying around a bag at the con doesn't kind of throw off the cosplay, and some other fun stuff, so I'm pretty excited.